What if I told you Christmas dinner used to include animal guts, sea creatures, and flaming alcohol? We're uncovering 12 forgotten British Christmas meals your nan's nan actually made. Most people reckon it's always been turkey, right? Wrong. That started in the 50s. Before then, British tables had dishes so wild they'd stop you mid-bite. I've dug up 12 completely lost recipes, and wait till you hear what they put in the stuffing back then. Number 12. Savory jellied meat molds. Let's kick off with something that sounds absolutely mental by today's standards. Savory jellied meat molds. Picture this. Minced meat, stock, and vegetables suspended in aspic jelly, set in fancy tin molds shaped like towers of fish. Yeah, really. This wasn't some posh London restaurant thing either. Working class families made these because the jelly preserved the meat and made cheap cuts go further. You'd unmold it onto a platter, slice it cold, and serve it alongside pickles. It wobbled, it glistened, and your great-great-nan thought it was proper festive. Why'd it disappear? Well, refrigeration happened, didn't it? Once everyone had a fridge, there was no need to suspend things in jelly to keep them fresh. Plus, let's be honest, the texture's a bit off-putting for modern palates. But back then, this was centerpiece material. That's just the warm-up though, because the next one was actually considered a luxury. Number 11, boiled fruitcake, Plum Duff. Plum Duff. Even the name sounds Victorian, doesn't it? This was a boiled fruitcake, and I mean properly boiled, wrapped in a cloth and dunked in a pot of simmering water for hours. No oven required, which was a godsend when most families shared a single range. It's dense, sticky, packed with dried fruit and suet, and you'd serve it hot with a ladleful of custard or brandy sauce. Here's what's mad. There's not a single plum in it. Plum was just old slang for raisins. So Plum Duff's really just raisin pudding, but that doesn't sound half as romantic, does it? It's basically the working class cousin of Christmas pudding, cheaper to make, no fancy steaming basins needed, and you could knock one out even if your oven was knackered. The reason you don't see it now is simple. Ovens got more reliable and affordable. Once baking became easy, boiled cakes just felt unnecessary. But I'll tell you what, the flavor? Absolutely banging. Deep, rich, spiced, and properly Christmassy. All right, that's the sweet stuff sorted for now. But the next dish? Total showstopper. Number 10, game pie. The meat pie centerpiece. This is where Victorian Christmas tables got properly theatrical. Forget your turkey crown back in the day. The centerpiece was a towering game pie. We're talking pheasant, rabbit, venison, maybe some pigeon, all packed into a raised pastry case with forcemeat, hard-boiled eggs, and rich gravy. Some families even baked a hare or partridge into the middle, whole. You'd slice into it and there'd be layers, like a meaty Christmas trifle. The crust wasn't just decoration either, it was structural. Thick, sturdy, load-bearing pastry that could hold all that meat and jelly without collapsing, and the thing was massive. A proper game pie could feed 20 people, easy. It was a flex, basically. If you could afford game and the time to make one of these, you were doing all right. Why don't we make 'em anymore? Well, game's expensive now, ain't it? And most of us don't fancy boning a rabbit in the kitchen on Christmas Eve. Fair enough. But back then, this was peak festive cooking, absolute skill required. Crucial detail though, game pie only worked because of what came next. Number 9, giblet pie. Right, giblet pie. If you don't know, giblets are the guts, liver, heart, gizzard, neck. All the bits we chuck in the bin now. But Victorians, waste not, want not. They'd stew those giblets with onions, stock, hard-boiled eggs, and sometimes a bit of bacon, then wrap it all in short-crust pastry and bake it golden. And here's the clever bit. This pie used the leftovers from the goose or turkey you were roasting anyway. Nothing went to waste. The gravy from the giblets? That's what you'd pour over your roast. The pie itself? That was for Boxing Day or even Christmas breakfast. Multi-use ingredients. That's how they stretched a feast across 3 days. Nowadays, most supermarket birds don't even come with giblets anymore, and if they do, we bin 'em or give 'em to the cat. But your nan's nan would have made a whole meal out of what we throw away. Different times, yeah? But here's the thing, giblet pie was just the support act. The real star? That's coming next. Number 8. Roast goose. This is the big one. Before turkey took over, goose was the bird. Rich families had goose. Poor families saved up all year for a goose club, literally a savings scheme where you'd put a few pennies away weekly so you could afford one at Christmas. Charles Dickens wrote about it. Scrooge sent the Cratchits a prize goose. It was the Christmas meat. And the flavor? Completely different from turkey. Goose is dark, rich, fatty, more like duck but bigger. The skin crisps up like crackling, and the fat renders down into this liquid gold you'd save for roasting potatoes or frying bread. Nothing went to waste. So why'd we ditch it for turkey? Honestly, marketing. After World War II, American-style turkeys got cheap and massive. You could feed more people for less money. Goose became a luxury again. And once supermarkets started pushing frozen turkeys every November, that was it. Goose became a posh throwback instead of the people's bird. But here's where it gets even weirder, what they stuffed the goose with. Number 7. Oyster stuffing. Yeah, you heard that right. Oysters. Inside the bird. Now before you pull a face, hear me out. In the 1800s, oysters weren't posh. They were cheap. Dirt cheap. Working class street food. You could buy a dozen for pennies, and they were everywhere. London, Liverpool, all the port towns. So stuffing your goose with oysters wasn't fancy. It was just practical. They added flavor, moisture, and bulk. The stuffing was usually breadcrumbs, herbs, butter, and chopped oysters, sometimes with a bit of lemon zest. You'd pack it into the cavity, roast the bird, and the oysters would cook into this savory, briny, umami-rich filling that soaked into the meat. Honestly, it sounds incredible. But then the Thames got polluted. Oyster beds died off. Prices skyrocketed. By the early 1900s, oysters went from working-class grub to luxury food, and stuffing went back to boring old sage and onion. Still, that's not even the oddest thing they ate. Wait till you hear about this next one. Number 6. Cabinet pudding. Cabinet pudding sounds dead posh, doesn't it? Like something the Queen would eat? But nah, it's just a clever way to use up stale sponge cake. You'd line a mold with buttered bread or cake, chuck in candied fruit and jam, pour over a custard mix, then steam or bake it till it's set, turn it out onto a plate, and boom. Impressive-looking dessert. The name probably comes from the layered look like a fancy cabinet with different shelves. Or maybe it was called that because it looked elaborate enough to serve at a cabinet dinner. No one really knows. But the point is, it's thrifty cooking disguised as luxury. Stale cake becomes a centerpiece. Why don't we make it anymore? Same reason we don't make bread pudding as often. We don't let things go stale. We've got cling film and freezers. Back then, nothing got wasted. Stale cake wasn't rubbish. It was the start of tomorrow's pudding. But that's still not the weirdest dessert. Brace yourself. Number 5. 12th Night Cake. Right, 12th night, January 6th, the official end of Christmas. And back in the day, you'd celebrate with a massive fruitcake, like Christmas cake, but extra. We're talking marzipan, royal icing, candied peel, the works. But here's the twist. You'd bake a dried bean and a dried pea into the cake. Whoever got the bean became king for the night. Whoever got the pea became queen. And they'd wear paper crowns and boss everyone about till midnight. It's basically a medieval party game baked into dessert form. Genius, really. And the cake itself was huge. Some families made ones big enough to feed 30 people. It was the grand finale of the whole festive season. So why did it die out? Well, Twelfth Night stopped being a big celebration once Victorian work culture kicked in. People had to go back to work, couldn't afford a 12-day holiday anymore. The cake became old-fashioned, and eventually, we just forgot about it. Shame, really. Anything that involves edible crowns and cake-based democracy sounds like a laugh. All right, that's the puddings done. But now we're getting into the properly old-school savory stuff. Number 4. Mincemeat pies with actual meat. When you bite into a mince pie now, it's sweet, yeah? Dried fruit, spices, maybe a splash of brandy. But originally, proper mince pies had meat in them. Minced beef or mutton mixed with suet, dried fruit, spices, and sometimes vinegar or wine, sweet and savory in the same mouthful. They were called shrid pies back in medieval times, shrid meaning shredded, and the filling was this intense, spiced, preserved mixture that could last for months. You'd make a big batch in November, store it in jars, and it'd keep till Easter if you were lucky. The meat fat preserved everything. Over time, the meat ratio dropped. By the Victorian era, it was mostly fruit with just a bit of suet for richness. And by the 20th century, the meat vanished completely. Now it's just sweet mincemeat, no mince at all. Weird, innit? The name stayed, but the recipe did a full 180. If you ever fancied making the original version, I won't lie, it's an acquired taste, but it's a proper piece of history. And speaking of history, this next one's from the same era, but way more intense. Number 3, boiled collops and suet-steamed meat dishes. Collops. That's just an old word for slices of meat, usually beef or bacon. And boiling was massive back then because not everyone had an oven. So you'd take your collops, wrap them in suet pastry, and steam or boil the whole parcel in a pot. The suet melted, the meat cooked tender, and you'd end up with this rich, savory bundle that you'd slice open and serve with gravy. It's basically a meat pudding. Steak and kidney pudding's a descendant of this style of cooking, but the original versions were simpler, just meat, suet, and maybe a bit of onion. No fancy fillings, just fuel. Why'd it fade out? Ovens became standard, roasting became easier, and boiled meat started to sound a bit grim. It got a bad rep as poor people's food, even though the flavor was genuinely good. Plus, suet went out of fashion once butter and oil became cheap. The whole method just became obsolete. But honestly, if you've ever had a proper steak and kidney pud from a good pub, you've tasted the descendant of this tradition. It survives just barely. Right, 2 more to go, and this next one's gonna divide opinion. Number 2, boiled beef and root vegetables. Boiled beef. Not roasted, not braised, just boiled. And I know what you're thinking, sounds rank, doesn't it? But here's the thing. When done properly, it's lush. You'd take a big joint of salted or fresh beef, drop it into a pot of simmering water with carrots, turnips, parsnips, onions, and let it cook low and slow for hours. The beef goes melt in your mouth tender. The veg soak up all that beefy flavor. And the broth? That's your gravy, your soup, your everything. This was Christmas dinner for a lot of working-class families in the north. Beef was cheaper than goose, boiling was easier than roasting, and you could stretch one joint across multiple meals. Box the broth with barley and you've got soup. Slice the cold beef and you've got sandwiches. It was economical genius. But once roasting became the aspirational method and ovens got common, boiled beef got left behind. It sounded boring, unglamorous, even though the taste and texture were spot on. And finally, the absolute king of forgotten Christmas puddings. Number 1, figgy pudding, old style plum pudding. Right, We all know Christmas pudding. Dark, dense, fruity, set it on fire with brandy. But the original version, figgy pudding, or old-style plum pudding, was different. It had figs in it for a start. Actual figs, chopped up and mixed with suet, breadcrumbs, dried fruit, treacle, spices, eggs, and a glug of ale or brandy. You'd tie it up in a cloth, boil it for hours, and serve it flaming with brandy butter or hard sauce. Now bring us some figgy pudding. You've sung that line 100 times, yeah? That's this. That's what they're on about. And it was the Christmas pudding for centuries before the Victorian version took over. What changed? Tastes got sweeter. Figs became harder to get. And the Victorians standardized the recipe into what we know now. Raisins, currants, sultanas, but no figs. The name figgy pudding stuck around in carols, but the actual dish, gone. If you ever make one the old way, though, it's incredible. Richer, darker, more complex than modern Christmas pud. Proper medieval vibes. So, there you go. 12 dishes your nan's nan would have recognized, but we've completely forgotten. Boiled beef, oyster stuffing, jellied molds. Absolute madness compared to what we eat now. But here's the thing, every single one of them tells a story about how we used to cook, what we could afford, and what mattered at Christmas. If you fancy trying any of these yourself, I've linked some vintage recipes in the description. Might not replace your turkey, but at least you'll know where it all came from. Happy Christmas, and cheers for watching.